80 years ago, 15 high-ranking Nazi Party officials gathered at a villa in the Berlin suburb of Wannsee to coordinate the implementation of what they called the final solution of the Jewish question. At the time, most of the participants were already aware that the Nazi regime had engaged in mass murder of Jews and other civilians, including Roma, gay men, Catholic nuns and priests, and people with disabilities. At the Wannsee Conference, the chief of the Nazi Security Service explained that approximately 11 million Jews in Europe would fall under the provisions of this final solution. As he explained the methods of how this would be carried out, he described the need for the complete extermination of the Jewish people. None of the officials present at the meeting objected to what they heard. And then he said the following: any final remnant that remains are to be regarded as the core of a new Jewish revival. My friends, 80 years later, we gather here today as the final remnant. We are survivors. We are the children and grandchildren of survivors. We are friends in faith and love, gathering across religious divides to share this moment of memory. And in our gathering, we are the core not only of a new Jewish revival, but of a revival of faith across religious lines, a community who in our diversity of faith are united in love, even as hate continues to be something to unite against, as evidenced just hours ago in a supermarket in Buffalo. We are united in a faith that knows that memory holds the key to building a world of peace and love, a faith which keeps in our hearts the ache of loss and in our bones the defiant cry of never again, even as a new war unfolds in lands far away, but dear to us in our shared humanity. As our service begins today, I am honored to welcome you all here to Oheb Shalom and to this holy sanctuary. I am grateful to Jim Ferrugiaro and to the amazing team of lay leaders who have met tirelessly for nearly a full year to ensure that today's program continues on as a SOMA tradition. I want to welcome the Holocaust survivors who are here with us today: Gerda Bikalis and Norbert Bikalis, Paulette Corsa Wolf Dorflaufer, Fred Heyman, Hannah Kesselman. We're thinking also of Adele Rappaport and Hetty Brash, who could not join us today. I want to welcome everyone here who has come to witness their stories, and we are honored to be joined by the Honorable Sheena C. Cullum, South Orange Village President, and Mayor Dean Daffis of Maplewood, retired New Jersey State Senator Ray Lesniak, and our other members of our town's leadership. Kenter Kistner and I are the new faces here in this lineup of South Orange Maplewood clergy, and so it is with what the Buddhists might call beginner's mind that I extend my gratitude as well to this group assembled here, my fellow faith leaders, who together nurture love and memory across religious lines. My friends, let us now pray. Our opening benediction this morning is based on a prayer composed by England's Chief Rabbi Ephraim Mervis, the Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, and Senior Imam Kari Asim, who in 2020 came together to write a special prayer intended to be used by people of any faith at their Holocaust Memorial Day activity.
Loving God, we come to you with heavy hearts, remembering the 6 million Jewish souls murdered during the Holocaust.
In the horrors of that history, when so many groups were targeted because of their identity, and in genocide heart.
Forgive us when we give space to fear, negativity, and hatred of others, simply because they are different from us.
In the light of God, we see everyone as equally precious, manifestations of the divine, and can know the courage to face the darkness.
Through our prayers and actions, help us to stand together with those who are suffering.
May light banish all darkness and love prevail over hate.
May goodwill triumph over evil, and may we and all of your creatures live in peace. And let us say,
Amen. Amen.
Fred was born in 1929 in Berlin, Germany, when the country was still the democratic Weimar Republic. He witnessed the rise and fall of Nazism with his earliest memory in 1932. President Paul von Hindenburg appointed Adolf Hitler to his cabinet as chancellor on January 30th, 1933. That was the start of the Holocaust, which lasted 12 years until April 30th, 1945. That's when Adolf Hitler committed suicide in the underground bunker of the Reich's chancellery in Berlin. During these 12 years, Fred, with his parents, survived the pogroms of the Nazi regime, the Nuremberg laws, the night of broken glass, when he walked to school across broken glass. Then, at 9 years old, when he saw his school and the adjacent synagogue in flames the next morning, that practically ended his education. His life was impacted by the anti-Semitic Nuremberg laws. The family survived during the heavily Allied bombings of the city, and he found himself buried in an underground shelter after one heavy air raid attack. In 1943, he and his mother were participants at the Rosenstrasse incident, a very famous protest. During that time, the Gestapo came to arrest Fred for transport to Auschwitz. Luckily, the arrest was avoided. The final years of the war, the family was hiding and were liberated by Soviet armed forces. With his parents, he resided in Berlin until the end of 1946, when the family emigrated to the United States. Settling in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, he completed his education. While in high school, his learning was once again interrupted. He was drafted and served with the U.S. 45th Infantry Division in North Korea. While in Korea, Fred completed his high school on self-study course. He attended the University of Wisconsin, studying electrical engineering that eventually led to an employment of 40 years with AT&T. He married Eloise, his wife, and fathered Renee and Gareth, who in turn gave him 4 grandchildren and 1 great-grandchild. After the death of his wife in 2004, Fred began to serve on the Holocaust Council of Greater Metro West. He is also a member of the Holocaust Advisory Committee of the Jewish Family Service. Fred has delivered over 450 speeches about the Holocaust and his firsthand experiences to more than 55,000 listeners.
I light this candle in memory of my parents who lived through these devastating years, shielding me and kept me alive. And I light this candle in memory of my uncles Leo Hyman, Benno Hyman, and their spouses who perished and whose story no longer can be told. I light this candle in memory of Edith Prager and her son Helmut, who perished in Auschwitz, and a dear friend, Rudi Seidel, who perished in Auschwitz. I wish also to dedicate this moment to my children Gareth and Renee, my grandchildren Stone, Leslie, Danielle, and Jordan, and my great-grandchild Joe, who all would not be alive today if I had not survived. And I light this candle to all my twins to say thank you for keeping my story, my legacy alive.
My name is Hedi Brash. I was born in Miskolc, Hungary in 1930. I studied music, dance, and sports as a child and appeared in both plays and commercials. I had a wonderful childhood until 1942, when my father, Alexander, was taken away to a labor camp, never to be heard from again. In 1944, my sister Eva, my mother Elizabeth, and I were moved to the Miskolc ghetto and later deported to Auschwitz concentration camp. Eva and I were separated from our mother and sent to Bremen, Germany, to work as forced laborers. We were barely survived a death march in Bergen-Belsen, where we were liberated by the British in April 1945. Following a year-long hospitalization in Sweden, my sister and I came to the United States to live with our grandmother and later reunited with our mother. I returned to school and graduated from NYU in 1955 with a degree in occupational therapy. I married J. Brash, a chemist, in 1955. We were married for 65 years. I am a member of the Board of Associates for the Holocaust Genocide Study Center at Drew University and received an honorary doctorate from Drew in 2012. I have shared my life story with over 1,000 high school and college students in the hope of educating them about the dangers of anti-Semitism and bigotry. I light this candle in memory of my father, Alexander Ellenbogen, my mother, Elizabeth, and my beloved sister, Eva.
In Hebrew, the word chai means life, and so we invite the children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren of survivors to please rise in their places as David Mayer and his son Levi light a candle in memory of David's grandparents, Reuben and Ilsa Weinrib, and Sam Gruer lights candles in memory of Cecile and Morris Gruer, and in memory of all those who were lost. Thank you. You may be seated.
Wolf Dorflaufer. I was one of 10 siblings, and I was born in Marseille, France, on May 8, 1943. My father was taken by the Nazis in January of 1943, was gassed in March at Sobibor. In 1944, when I was an infant, my mother and 5 of my siblings were rounded up by the Nazis and went to Auschwitz. While hospitalized at the age of 1, A Gestapo came looking for me and tried to take me away. I was rescued by a heroic nurse who claimed that I was her child. My sister Fortune put me in an orphanage run by the OSC in 1945. Fortunately, I was eventually adopted by the Wolf family from South Orange, New Jersey at the age of 4.5. My birth father, mother, and 5 siblings perished in the Holocaust. In 1971, I discovered that I had 3 surviving siblings as well as an extended family living in France. I traveled to France in 1972 and was reunited with my 2 sisters and my brother. I now reside in West Orange, New Jersey, and have 3 children and 7 grandchildren. I'm lighting the candle in memory of my parents and my siblings in France, and also my parents in the United States.
Hello, my name is Francine Nelson. My mother, Adele Rappaport, was born in Poland in 1924 to a family of 6 children. Her happy family life ended with the German invasion in 1939. My mother was 15 years old at that time. In 1940, her family relocated to the Brzeźin ghetto, and 2 years later to the Lodz ghetto. In 1944, Adele's 2 younger sisters were taken away by the Nazis. One of her younger brothers was duped into thinking he would get food if he volunteered to go to a so-called work camp. None of them were heard from again. The rest of the family was taken to Auschwitz-Birkenau, and only Adele and her sister Esther survived to move on to Bergen-Belsen and then Magdeburg. There, Adele worked in a munitions factory, and Esther contracted typhus and was sent away. Following liberation in 1945, Adele met and married Louis Rappaport, a Hungarian Jew. Their journey to America took them through Italy, where they lived in a displaced persons camp in Rome. While there, she learned that her sister Esther had miraculously survived. Adele will turn 97 years old in April and has 2 daughters, 7 grandchildren, and 7 great-grandchildren. My mother is lighting this candle in memory of her mother, Gittel Malka, her father, Herschel Zvi, her sisters, Esther Ziesel, Yetta, and Elka, and brothers, Eliezer and Shmuel Mendel.
Our speaker this year, Ann Millman, has a unique story. Ann's family's story of survival during the Holocaust is one that may be unfamiliar and less often told, but it offers an important window into the experience of being war-torn, suffering unimaginable loss, and being a refugee, and yet surviving and ultimately thriving. This is a story that continues to resonate today, as we know. Ann's beginnings were a veritable sprouting from the ashes. Despite the fear, deprivation, and suffering that were ever present, her life was ultimately characterized by strength and resolve to overcome obstacles and live in full bloom. She took this resolve so much to heart that one might say she's lived several lives in the span of one. Ann has touched every corner of the natural world and experienced cultures far and wide. She's given her heart and soul to fight for others as a teacher, as a key contributor at the Anti-Defamation League, and as an organizer and volunteer at a homeless shelter in Manhattan, among many other things. She's given the world the gifts of words and images as a published author, she's living in full bloom. Although Anne's family story is one full of hardship and pain, it is the glimpses of beauty and art, those who didn't see the artwork outside, that's what I'm referring to in part, and life that will stay with you, and they will not extinguish. So I'm proud and honored to introduce to you a woman who has been my mentor in life for nearly 50 years, my mother, Anne Millman.
Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me? Okay. I didn't expect this lovely introduction from my daughter Ilana, but to thank you. And as Ilana said, if you have not had a chance to look at the artwork that's right outside the sanctuary, please do so on your way out. I had titled my story, How an Artist Survived the Holocaust. And that artist was my father. So, and I also want to just make sure that my grandson, who is my youngest grandson, who is here with me today, that you're wide awake and listening, because you have to remember and tell. Okay, very important. Okay. Until I was nearly 50 years old, I learned very little about my parents, about how my parents survived what they called the war. I knew from a very young age that my mother, born Sarna Pinkel in 1916 Warsaw, had lost her entire family, her mother, father, and 3 siblings. I also knew that my father, David Weishman, born in 1912 in Dęblin, Poland, had lost his parents and 4 of his 7 younger siblings. I knew that the Nazis had murdered them and millions of other Jews and millions of others as well. Beyond that, all my parents told me was that they had been hidden by a Polish family somewhere in the countryside near Warsaw, where I was born in 1944. No names, no stories, no details. But in 1992, I took my then 76-year-old mother on a trip back to Poland, a trip she wanted to take as a last look at her hometown. My 21-year-old son, Noah, who is here with me today, joined us as we traveled to Warsaw and then around Eastern Europe with a group of American Jews visiting sites like Terezin and Auschwitz. Through it all, my mother showed none of the emotions or outrage of others in our group. Finally, after dinner one night, perplexed by her stoicism, I pressed her and asked how seeing these places made her feel. My mother looked at my son, then at me, then back at him. Maybe she had a sense of transmitting a legacy to the next generation, or somehow my son's presence impelled her to open up, for suddenly she broke her long silence and announced that she wanted to tell me the truth about my birth and their survival. But first, she swore us to secrecy, lest her story reached the wrong ears and led to terrible retribution. I couldn't imagine what she meant. What followed bore no resemblance to the story I had known all those years. I had been born not in Poland, but in Kazakhstan. They had not been hidden in Poland, but had fled to Russia and wound up in labor camps in Siberia. My mind reeled as I tried to absorb these shocking disclosures. I wanted to know more, but my mother could not continue. I still don't have all the facts. I would have to wait for other opportunities to question my parents before learning more about what really happened. Over the next 10 years, until my father died in 2002, I convinced him to draw sketches of his memories, and using them as a springboard, I extracted halting revelations. I took these bits and pieces to my mother and uncles in Israel and Australia to get their perspectives. These pieces of the puzzle enabled me to patch together a reasonable narrative, and as the truth slowly emerged, I couldn't help wonder why it was so frightening and potentially dangerous for them to share this information. Gradually, I came to understand, and here is that story. My parents were married in Warsaw on Lag BaOmer, May 7th, 1939. This week will be Lag BaOmer, too. My father, David, who, as I said, came from Demblin, some 100 kilometers southeast of Warsaw, had escaped his intended fate as a tailor to become an artist. Mostly self-taught, he made a living from such commercial work as signs and advertisements, political cartoons for the Yiddish press, and set designs for the Jewish theater. My mother, Sarna, was an excellent student who had completed her matura and been admitted to a university program in mathematics. To support herself, she tutored and did knitting and crocheting. They met when my father needed a sweater and was referred to her. On September 1st, less than 4 months after their wedding, the Nazi war machine drove into Poland and quickly conquered it. As the invasion began, the young men of military age were ordered by Polish authorities to leave the city and regroup on the outskirts, possibly to stage a counterattack. David and his friends left the city, as did my mother's 2 brothers, Kuba and Heniek, but it quickly became clear that no defense would be made, and everyone returned home. David and his friend Shimon were convinced that they should leave Warsaw and Poland. They went to Białystok, then in Russia, to check on their prospects. They returned to Warsaw determined to flee and to convince others to do the same. But my mother's parents were not swayed. Jews had seen such troubles before and survived. They would stay where they were until things improved. Their family would stay together and be fine. I can only try to imagine my mother's dilemma. Should this 23-year-old leave the life she knew and the people she loved on the advice of her new husband? Or should she defy him and stay behind? Was the danger as great as her husband thought, or would it blow over, as her father said? 23 years old, she made her choice, staying behind just long enough to abort a pregnancy that would greatly complicate her escape. And then she journeyed alone to join her husband in Białystok. How long they stayed there, I never found out. While the border was clearly porous, the Soviets were not eager to be flooded by refugees. As illegal aliens, they were extremely vulnerable, and soon enough, they were arrested. My father said they were given a choice: deportation back to Poland or detention in a Siberian labor camp. They opted for detention and were shipped off to the Gulag. There, my dad was assigned to hard labor in the forests. The winters were brutally cold, and the summers, he said, consisted of nothing but mud and flies, brought home to me with his customary irony and humor by some of his memory sketches. The environment and conditions were almost unbearably harsh, and many got ill and died. One day, one of the camp officials came to my father to ask a favor. He heard that my father was an artist. Could he paint a portrait of Stalin? Of course, my father replied. Everyone knows what Stalin looks like. If they could provide him with paints and other materials, he could produce a portrait. It seems the labor camp was expecting a visit from some VIPs, and the administrators wanted to spruce the place up. As in the famous Soviet Potemkin villages, the inmates were assigned to clean, prime, and organize whatever looked improper so the visitors would be impressed. The portrait of Stalin was an added touch. My father delivered the portrait as promised, and everyone seemed pleased. So pleased, in fact, that they came back for a second request. could my father paint a second portrait, this time of the provincial governor? Well, this was a harder task, since my father didn't know what he looked like. But, he said, if someone could bring him a photograph, my father would paint the portrait, and so he did. Well, when the delegation of visitors came, they were duly impressed by the transformed camp, and particularly by the two magnificent portraits. Who made these portraits, they asked, and my father was brought in for praise and toasts. Soon word got out, and a long line of government officials sent requests to have David paint their portraits. Instead of having to tramp through the snow to cut down trees in the forest, my father was indoors in an improvised studio using his skills to craft flattering portrayals of these communist apparatchiks. No doubt he fared better than most because his work conditions were so much better and safer. After some time, the director of the labor camp, who had taken a liking to my father, came to him with a proposal. Since all you're doing is painting, there's no reason to keep you here in Siberia. You should be in a more central location, like Kazakhstan. And that's how my parents wound up in Jambul, Kazakhstan in 1943. 1 year later, in March 1944, I was born. The war would not be over for another year, and I had always thought this a most unlikely and inauspicious time to have a child, especially if they were in hiding in some farmer's cellar. Now I saw what made it possible. Though Mom told me she was so afraid to have another abortion that she determined to hide her pregnancy. Luckily, in this case, she was so thin and bundled up against the cold that her pregnancy remained a secret till she delivered me. Undoubtedly, my father's decision to flee Poland and the lucky break he got because of his skill as an artist helped save them. But the story doesn't end there. When the war was over in 1945, my parents went back to Poland to check on their families. No one was left for them there, not a trace of Mom's mother, Miriam, her father, Pinkas, and her 3 siblings, brothers Kuba and Henyek, and sister Fela. Gone were Dad's parents, Issachar and Hava Weichman, his sisters Hannah and Esther, and his brothers Eli and Yitzhak. Learning how they all died is yet another story. The devastation and continued anti-Semitism my parents encountered in Poland was beyond belief. The Soviets had overrun Poland and claimed it for their empire. While David and Sarna in some ways owed their survival to the Soviets, they had no illusions about the oppressive system they ran, not just in wartime, but all the time. The only way they could leave was to escape, which they managed to do in 1946 with the help of Jewish volunteers from Palestine who were eager to rescue any remaining Jews. My very first memory is of this nighttime escape. I was the only child in the back of a truck, and not a welcome one. The others feared that I would cry and alert the border guards to our presence. But I seemed to have understood the danger and stayed quiet, even as we waded across the border river. The trek took several days, but eventually we were in the safety of a refugee camp in Austria. There, my father learned that 2 of his brothers, Jacob and Matis, had survived, and we were soon to reunite with one in Vienna and with the other in Munich. We stayed in Germany until late 1950, all the time helped by Jewish relief organizations, such as the Joint Distribution Committee, ORT, and Hayas. I remember those years well, but not the turmoil my parents were going through. We were displaced persons looking for a new home. Our first thought was to go to the newly established state of Israel. They bought all sorts of provisions that were not easy to get in Israel. My uncle Matis went to Israel in 1948 and sent very discouraging letters telling my parents how harsh and dangerous it was, no place to bring a young child. Uncle Jacob convinced David that they should all apply to come to America. Then, before anyone got approved, Jacob left for Australia, which was giving new immigrants financial incentives. The line of applicants to the United States was long and the approval process slow. My parents had no one to sponsor them, which made things harder. They also had a potential problem in their history. their years in Siberia. This was 1950, and Senator Joseph McCarthy was already spearheading a campaign of suspicion and accusation against anyone with communist connections. It was the year Julius and Ethel Rosenberg were brought up on charges of espionage before a grand jury that ultimately indicted them. Many people warned my parents, that their application to immigrate to the United States would be stopped cold if they mentioned their time in the Soviet Union. Being skilled survivors, they did what they had to do and came to the United States. The truth of their past was their secret, a secret they certainly could not share with their young child. But the secret took its toll. My parents continued to fear discovery, as if they were still living with the dangers of the past. Even after the McCarthy scourge was over, they could never be confident of their status. Dad continued to paint and exhibit, even as he made a living in commercial art, and I inherited many of his works after my mother passed away in 2014. But as I later learned from some of his admirers, he always pulled away from any publicity that might lead to an interview and questions about his past. He didn't want to lie, but he could not safely tell the truth. Toward the end of her life, my mother couldn't recall her confession or the events she admitted took place so many years before. She had reverted to the cover story that kept her safe, and I did not challenge her. My parents were not the only ones who escaped to the Soviet Union and survived the Holocaust as a result. The figures vary, but some 200 to 300,000 Jews did the same. It's a story that has not been told very much, and I wonder why. Judging from the experience of my parents, it is fraught with a strange mix of guilt, pride, and fear. There's the guilt of all survivors who can never fully grasp why they stayed alive while so many of their loved ones perished. There's the pride of having had the insights or instincts or talents or good fortune to have made good choices and been in the right place at the right time. And, as in the case of my parents, there is the legacy of fear, not just the fear that lingers in the lives of those who have lived through trauma and life-threatening danger, but in their case, the fear that remains from a period of political oppression and intimidation in our own country. I can't help think of the illegal immigrants and their offspring who live in our country today. I have come to understand the fear they must experience. As I think about my parents' story of survival, I see moments of great courage, not unlike the moments when God tells Abraham, Lech Lecha. They went again and again to lands they did not know. They lived as strangers, refugees, displaced persons, immigrants, the Griener. They adapted, learned new languages, made new friends, found new jobs, made a new path for themselves and their children. I also see the corrosive effect their fear of discovery had, and I know their lives would have been fuller and freer if they could have told the truth. Even as I say these words and tell the story of their survival, a small voice inside me is saying, I hope this won't fall on the wrong ears. Thank you for this honor of having me here.
My name is Danuta Kozlovsky, and I'm remembering my godmother, Władysława Holmes, the angel of above, who was honored at Yad Vashem as a righteous Gentile. Władysława worked with the Polish underground organization Żegota, which provided Jews with food, false documents, and money, and saved Jewish adults and children by hiding them in convents and with Polish families, including her own. I was raised as a Roman Catholic and was 6 years old when Germany and Russia invaded Poland in 1939. My father was arrested by the Russians and sent to a Soviet concentration camp, while my mother, my brother, and I were forced to Siberia, where we lived for 2 years in brutal conditions. At age 8, I became blind and deaf due to starvation and illness. I finally escaped with my family and made our way from Russia through Persia and Palestine, and eventually to England, where I met my husband, Tadeusz, a long-time candle lighter at this service, who passed away in 2013. I have 3 children and 11 grandchildren.
My name is Hannah Kesselman. I was born in Germany in 1930. My parents decided to leave Germany in 1933, and we moved to France, thinking that it would be safe there. Eventually, we wanted to come to the US, but they did not let us in because my mother was born in Poland, and Polish-born people were not welcome. I was separated from my parents for 4 years from the age of 8 on. First, I was sent to Switzerland and later back to France, where I lived in 3 Jewish children's homes run by the Oheb. When my father was arrested in Montreuil, he was sent to a camp in Marseille called Les Milles. He managed to escape from the train that was taking him first to Drancy and then to Auschwitz. And this was in 1943 when we were finally reunited. Unfortunately, we were arrested by the Italian army, who took us first up into the Alps, and later they took us with them on the train back into Italy, when Italy declared armistice on September the 8th, 1943. Unfortunately, we were under German occupation again and had to hide again. A Capuchin monk named Father Benedetto, Père Benoit in French, managed to have me hidden in a Catholic convent, and I stayed there until the liberation of Rome on June the 4th, 1944. When my mother picked me up that morning, I found out that my father had been arrested again 2 weeks before the liberation of Rome, and we never heard from him again. I finally managed to come to this country in 1947, being born in Germany, but my mother took many more months to get here. We made a new life, and I'm married Jose Kesselman. I have 1 son, Jerry, 1 daughter-in-law, Cheryl, and 4 grandchildren. I am lighting this yard-side candle in memory of my father, Jakob Ravitch. My maternal grandparents, the Holzers, my paternal grandparents, the Ravitches, all my aunts and uncles, and my cousins, who were all killed during the Holocaust. And this is also in memory of my mother, Gisa Ravich, and my husband, Jose Kesselman, who died here in this country.
שוכן במרומים, המצא מנוחה נכונה תחת כנפי השכינה, במעלות קדושים לשמות כל אחינו בני ישראל שנטבחו בשואה, אנשים, נשים וטף שנחנקו ונשרחו ונשרפו ונהרגו, שמסרו את נפשם על קידוש השם בגן עדן תהי מנוחתם. אנא בעל הרחמים הסתירם בסתר כנפיך ליעלמים, וצרור בצרור החיים את נשמותיהם. אדוני הוא נחלתם וינוחו בשלום על משכבותיהם, ונאמר אמן.
Exalted, compassionate God, grant infinite rest in your sheltering presence among the holy and the pure. The souls of all of our loved ones, our brethren, who've gone to their eternal home, murdered at the hands of the Nazi regime. Men, women, children, slaughtered and suffocated and burned to ashes. May their memories forever endure. May we continue to tell their stories so that they inspire us to do acts of justice and kindness in our lives. May their souls forever be bound up in the bond of our lives. May they rest in peace. And together let us say, Amen.
Amen.
Careless. I was born in Breslau, in Germany at the time, now called Wrocław, in Poland. At about the same time, the Nazi Party came to power. I was an only child, living with my parents when I witnessed Kristallnacht, the night of broken glass. My father was able to leave for the United States, but my mother and I were unable to obtain the necessary visas to follow. It was a separation that was to last 8.5 years. As the persecutions accelerated, my mother and I were constantly on the run, from Germany to Belgium, and then in various places in France. We narrowly escaped the fate of most Jews in Nazi-occupied Europe. I had the good fortune to be reunited with both my parents after the war. And I came to America as a teenager. I studied part-time while raising a family with my husband, Norbert, and have earned 2 advanced degrees. I have worked as a writer, a lobbyist, an association executive for nonprofit organizations. Like my husband, I have devoted a great deal of time furthering Holocaust education and remembrance. I have also authored a memoir, Through the Valley of the Shadow of Death, a Holocaust Childhood. Norbert and I have 2 children, 5 grandchildren, and 1 great-grandchild. I am lighting this candle in memory of the righteous Gentiles who risked so much to save some of us.
I'm Norbert Bikaus, born 92 years ago in Berlin, Germany. After my parents and my brother were deported to Poland, I was sent in 1939 on the Kindertransport to France. I spent most of the war years in various children's homes in France, cared for by OSE, pronounced OSE, a French Jewish welfare organization that saved me and several thousand other Jewish children. Part of this period is shown in the award-winning film called The Children of Shaban. Toward the end of the war, I managed to escape over the mountains into Switzerland. Sometime later, I learned through the International Red Cross that my brother Richard had been able to survive the terrible persecutions in Poland and was now living in Austria. We were able to meet a few months later at the Austrian-Swiss border, and he gave me the devastating news that our parents had been murdered in Belzec, one of the early killing centers in Poland. I arrived in America at the age of 17 and immediately resumed my studies, which had been severely curtailed As a Jew, I had been expelled from school both in pre-war Germany and in wartime France. I now worked hard to support myself while studying for my high school diploma and later my Bachelor of Science, Master of Science, as well as my PhD degree. I had a successful, multifaceted career as a polymer chemist, including a 3-year stay at the American Embassy to represent the United States in science in Europe. My wife Gerda and I have been happily married for nearly 70 years, and we have 2 children, 5 grandchildren, and 1 great-grandchild. I'm lighting this candle in memory of my dear parents and the countless other victims of Nazi barbarism.
Over 44 years ago, my father, Max Randall, talked to our rabbi, Yechiel Ornstein, about the idea of creating an interfaith Holocaust remembrance service for South Orange and Maplewood community. At the time, there was no active clergy association, and Rabbi suggested that my father go speak with Sister Rose Thiering at Seton Hall to get her take on the idea of an interfaith service. When my father and mother went to meet with Sister Rose, they came with certain assumptions, which was they would meet a quiet woman in a nun's habit. And by the laughter, I can tell you, you know, they were very wrong. So they talked to Rose about the idea of the service. She was so enthusiastic from the get-go, and so the seeds of this service were sown. I will tell you that when my father went to leave that first meeting, he reached over to shake Rose's hand, and her response was, "What? No hug?" Over the years, I had the honor of getting to know Sister Rose as she graced our family Seder table and other family gatherings. Sister Rose was strong, passionate, determined, and not one to take no for an answer. She was also fully committed to building interfaith bridges through the lessons of the Holocaust. As I was honored to know Sister Rose, so I am honored to introduce Eve Morawski, this year's recipient of the Sister Rose Thiering Holocaust Education Award. Eve truly embodies so many of the traits that made Sister Rose such an unusual and remarkable human being. Eve is passionate about keeping the lessons of the Holocaust alive in our community. Eve is strong, she's determined, and a real doer. She makes things happen just as Sister Rose did. And like Sister Rose, Eve is reluctant to take no for an answer. Eve has served on this committee for as long as I can remember, taking on any job that needed and needs to be done, including serving as co-chair. While we all face adversity in life, as has Eve, yet through life's challenges, her commitment to this committee and to honoring the memory of her parents and teaching about the dangers of bigotry and prejudice has never wavered. It is my honor and privilege to present this year's Sister Rose Thiering Holocaust Education Award to Eve Morawski.
So I think I can get through my remarks without tears, but how lucky am I to be introduced by Beth, the daughter of the founder of this service and founding mother, our beloved Pearl. When Beth is assigned someone to be introduced, we know that it's going to be researched, it's going to be from the heart, and it couldn't be more genuine because that's who Beth is. So thank you. And for this, I need my glasses. I am so honored the committee selected me to be this year's recipient of the Sister Rose Thering Award, putting me in the company of distinguished award alumni like Father Lawrence Frizzell of the Judeo-Christian Institute of Seton Hall, Oscar Lax of blessed memory, Barbara Wind, Pearl, Cantor Rickey of this congregation, and beloved teachers Caroline Pugh, Ellen Hark, Janet Bustrin, and Suzanne Ryan, among others. When you do the work you know is important to do, you are surprised when someone calls you out in a good way and says, "Nice job." So thank you. This is not a field of study for me, though I have researched everything I talk about. This is my family's history, of which I am deeply proud. When I present to various groups, I tell them about my late parents and their experiences in World War II. I also speak what happened to Poland in and after the war. My mother grew up in southeastern Poland near Lviv. It was a mixed neighborhood of Jews and Catholics. Her best friend growing up was Jewish, as was mine. My mom spoke Yiddish and was entirely familiar and comfortable with Jewish culture, passing the knowledge of traditions to me like sitting Shiva, food particular to certain holidays, etc. Her 20th yahrzeit was last Sunday, Mother's Day. After the war started and the Soviets were encroaching from the east, deportations of civilians to Siberia started. My mother was rounded up on her way home from school, identified by the Jewish family doctor as being an anti-socialist element. She was a Girl Scout. She was brought to a holding area, not allowed to see my grandmother, who scrambled to find out what happened. A bribe was sought to release her. My babcha, grandmother, brought 2 valuable kilns, precious family possessions. Of course, the Soviets kept the goods and did not release her. She wound up packed in a cattle car, as did about 2 million other Poles, shipped to gulags in frozen Far Eastern Russia. People died in obviously abhorrent conditions, their bodies tossed out along the way. When Stalin switched sides after Hitler attacked Russia, Polish General Anders negotiated the release of most of those captured, and they became the basis for the Second Corps Polish Army, under the auspices of British command. Those who had survived were transported to the Middle East to recover and train to fight. Schools were formed for children. The Institute of National Remembrance in Poland has been marking their odyssey through a Trail of Tears project, visiting grave sites and putting up historic markers. My mother finished training as a nurse and with exceptional leadership skills ran a MASH hospital in what was then Palestine, Egypt, and Italy. In 1967, 27 years after her capture, my mom received a telegram at our Maplewood home from the British Red Cross. I was little, but I will never forget it. Usually stoic, she dropped to her knees on the ground, sobbing. It read, "My grandmother's name is looking for my mother's maiden name. Are you this person? If so, contact our office." Through a chance acquaintance, my grandmother was able to trace my mother through England, knew she married there, and left for New York. In 1969, they were finally able to reunite. Much paperwork was required for visas, etc., but we made it, and I got to meet cousins. I was thrilled that I finally had family. My father, however, was only able to travel to Poland for a few days because he had been told the NKVD, precursor to the KGB, wanted him dead. Dad came from Częstochowa, southwestern Poland. He was at Poland's equivalent of West Point and immediately recruited to military service when Germany invaded. He became a company commander and eventually played a big part in the citywide Warsaw Uprising of 1944. He and his group's role are written about in history books. It was startling and cool to see his picture in Warsaw museums. At the 60th commemoration of the uprising, I had the honor of dedicating a city park to him, near where he fought so boldly and bravely. Again, as they did at the beginning of the war, the Allies betrayed Poland by not showing up as they said they would do to shore up the uprising and what was an early surprise victory for Polish patriots. Eventually, the Nazis regained their footing and pummeled the city as revenge, leveling 90% of it. The Soviet quote-unquote allies across the river smugly watched and waited. My father was captured and spent time in Sobibor, another camp, and wound up in Neuengamme in Germany, where he was starved, tortured, and left for dead. His back was broken as he was repeatedly thrown downstairs, causing him a lifetime of pain, but he did survive. He finished his civil engineering studies through a master's degree in England, and knowing he could not return safely to Poland, convinced my mother to cross the ocean to America. Not a clear choice. The United States was not friendly to Eastern European immigrants. Canada, Australia, South America were where most of my parents' acquaintances relocated if they opted to leave England. But the British firm he worked for had an office in New York, so he was able to transfer to it, which also helped them avoid processing through Ellis Island, since he already had a work visa. So many more details, which I hope to eventually get into a book. But that is the overview of how I got here. Born a Jersey girl in Rahway, and this August, a 60-year resident of Maplewood. My parents closed on their American dream home in '62. Arriving in their 40s, as I did, I'm the youngest of the second generation I know who speaks of a parent, not grandparent, in a concentration camp. Very different background and perspective from my peers in Jefferson School, Maplewood Junior High, and Columbia High. But at our holiday table, my parents always included those like us who were starting out and had no family here. She would order, then pick up kosher in Brooklyn. Everyone would speak Polish and feel comfortable for a few hours as they navigated a challenging new world. Both of my parents could have been so bitter about what they went through, but they chose not to be. They looked forward, were hopeful, and had a diverse group of friends. I'm so grateful for their example and sacrifices. And I look to Poland today and I think similarly. World War II officially started on September 1st, 1939, when Germany invaded Poland from the west. 2 weeks later, the Soviets invaded from the east. And so the vice grip began to tighten as everyone sought escape and/or survival. In the midst of this were heroic actions with huge personal risks. Poland was the only country where hiding or helping a Jew led to death for the enabling person, their family, and those they sheltered. Professor Jan Karski, who my dad knew, was the first messenger to reach FDR with his eyewitness news of the concentration camps, and the president did nothing. Karski was posthumously awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom. Żegota, the Polish council to aid Jews successfully, worked with the resistance to help thousands of them from 1942 to 1945. Poland was the only country in German-occupied Europe where such a government established and supported underground organization existed. By the end of the war, Poland paid the heaviest price. 6 million of its citizens perished, 3 million Jews and 3 million Christians, 20% of the population, 1/5 of the country, the most per capita of any country in the war. And for all its valiant sacrifices, Poland's invitation to the Allied victory parade was rescinded. A war warrior Churchill caved to Stalin, particularly insulting given his enthusiastic praise for the Polish squadrons flying with the Royal Air Force, who scored the most kills in the Battle of Britain. The US ambassador to Poland resigned in disgust at how the Allies had betrayed the Polish people. And so the communist Iron Curtain came down and shut off most Western contact for over 40 years. Fast forward to now, where Poland has taken in 3 million war refugees so far. Or, as the Polish president has said, our Ukrainian guests. Relief agencies early on the scene, like Catholic Charities and UNICEF, asked where are the tent cities? But there were none, because Poles all over the country were taking people into their homes. The city of Rzeszów, about an hour from the border, has doubled in population as a result. Actor Sean Penn, co-founder of a care agency who visits emergencies all over the world, said he had never known a host country to be as hospitable as Poland. so generous, so caring. I did not see anything in the Western press about the Polish evacuation of Afghan female judges and lawyers with their families. Most have settled in Poland. Excuse me. There is more I share in a 20-minute talk, but I've given you some of the facts in 5. Teacher's going to teach. At a time when so many of the cultural and historical debates that royal America consist of cheap slogans and sound bites, intellectual and moral sloppiness, always remember facts do matter. Demonstrate the moral authority of careful, deliberate scholarship in all its complexity and power. There is no way, even at this great distance of time, to approach such an enormous crime, such monstrous human inequity and suffering as the Holocaust demands we process. Please, never forget and do not be complacent. And with that, I will wrap up with a final thanks to the committee for the award I will always cherish. To you for your attention, and here on the bima, a little closer to God. Last October, I was astounded to be diagnosed with advanced cancer. After suffering trauma in the spring, I was ill through the summer, and it took detective work to figure out what was wrong. Dr. Joshua Strauss, who's watching us on live stream, was the lead doc on my case. He did figure it out, and I was sprinted into an aggressive chemotherapy protocol, which continues to have my throat raw. It was tough, especially the last 2, but a PET scan 2 weeks ago showed I was in remission and I'd made a remarkable recovery. So I'm very, very glad to be here today. I thank God and my faith, Dr. Strauss, Daniela Greaves, Allison Wanda, and all the oncology nurses. And gratitude for the friends who gave rides, Lester Williams, Jim Farajaro, dropped off food, etc. The stress that spawned the cancer is still in my life, but I'm working really hard to end it. I unabashedly ask for your prayers. Dziękuję bardzo. Thank you. And Shalom Aleichem.
We now come to the candle lighting in memory of those 6 million Jews and 5 million other human beings who were killed in the Holocaust. We are grateful to students from the Seton Hall University Hillel who are here to assist with the candle lighting. And as I call on each survivor who is here, I invite you to rise in your place or to come forward if you are able. Survivor Gerda Bikalis. Dr. Norbert Bikalis. Bob Socher. Bob is coming. Fred Heyman. Is Fred here? Hannah Kesselman. Danuta Kaslavsky, honoring her godmother, Vladislava Homs, a righteous Gentile, known as the Angel of Lviv. Fran Nelson, daughter of survivor Adele Rappaport, who could not be with us today. Beth Randall Brannigan, dear friend of survivor Hetty Brash, who could not be with us today. Anne Millman, in memory of her parents, Sarna and David Weichman. Sam Gruer, in memory of his father, Morris Gruer, and mother, Cecile Gruer. David Meyer, in memory of his grandparents, Reuben and Ilse Weinrib. Eve Morawski, in memory of her parents. Samantha Bernstein of Seton Hall, Hillel, lights a candle in memory of all those who perished and have no one to light a candle for them. And finally, I call up Reverend Sviatoslav Hot of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of the Holy Ascension in Maplewood to light a candle to honor the brave citizens of Ukraine and to remember the innocent lives lost as we witness a 21st century tyrant unleashing terror on the people of Ukraine.
Please rise. Yitkadav veyitkadash.
Kishnev.
Warsaw. Auschwitz. Dachau. Buchenwald. Baba Yar. Baghdad. Hebron.
Amen. Yehish miraba mevarak le'alam ule'almei almaya yitparak v'yishtabach ve'yitpa'a ve'yitramah
Far Etzion, Mainz.
Vitnase vehitadai
Theresen.
Vehitale vitala
Treblinka.
Shemedi kudesha
Bergen-Belsen.
meriku Leila Leila
Vilna.
Mikol Mikata Veshirata
Busha.
Tushbekata venekemata
Masada.
Damiran me'alma
Jerusalem.
Vehimeru Amen.
Yehei Shlama Rabba Min Shmaya. V'chaim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'yimru Amen. Osei Shalom b'mromav. Hu Yaseh Shalom. Aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'yimru Amen.
Friends, we have gathered and prayed, heard the music and the witness of the people. We are humbled to be in the presence of survivors, and we are grateful to hear the voice of God in our midst through each and every one of you bearing witness. We will never forget lives that were lost. We embrace and we cherish each other, and may our cry of never again be heard as we go forth in peace for justice. And all the children of God who are the children of Abraham go in shalom and say, Amen.